Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gnostic Media's UnSpun, episode number 73. Today, Michael Jones is with us once again to continue our discussion from last week. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
It's good to have you back. The audience loved you last week. We're really happy to have you with us again. And, there was a whole outline that I had prepared last week. And so we didn't get to go through all of that. And hopefully it's broadcasting now. But anyway, I hope the audience is seeing it. I'm not seeing it show up yet. If somebody could let me know if there's a problem viewing it, I would appreciate it. But anyway, so Michael, basically just wanted to start off where we left off. We were continuing on with Wagner and with Nietzsche and with the creation of the whole. What would you describe it as?
Well, I mean, we're talking about a number of different things here. It depends on which perspective you're going to take it from. If you just want to start off with Wagner, you're talking about a man who was a committed a revolutionary, who was also a very talented musician, and who those two things at the beginning of his career pretty much traveled
You know
along.
what? Hold on a second. You know what? The feed may not be working. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm going to try to restart it here. I'm sorry. All right. Well, hopefully it kicks in. I'm not sure what happened there. It was showing that it did not start the feed, and we've been here for several minutes. It shows that the stream is live and going, but I'm not sure if people can hear. Okay, they are saying it works.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that. All right. So anyway, this is UnSpun. Well, I'm just going to start over, and I'll edit this out later. But ladies and gentlemen, UnSpun episode number 73 from Gnostic Media. I'm here once again with E. Michael Jones, continuing our part 2, discussing Michael's book Dionysos Rising, and it's a hugely popular book. It's a very important discussion. Michael's got a lot of great information, and the audience really keyed into what you had to say last week, Michael. And so I'm really happy to have you back. Anyway, I just want to dive into what we were continuing on with last week. I was just asking you, what do we call this phenomenon that we've seen start with Wagner, going into Nietzsche, etc., and into modern music, rock music, if you can call it that today? What do we call it?
Well, as I was saying, you have a man at the heart of this, or the beginning of this particular story, Richard Wagner, who is at the same time a committed revolutionary. He took part in the Revolution of 1848, and also a very talented composer who was part of the tradition of German music that had reached a certain point of development. And in the beginning, these were two parallel tracks that really didn't affect each other. He was struggling. He had personal struggles. One of them was had to do with sex, the relationship between the sex and the moral order as manifested in Christianity, and he had done Tannhäuser as a basically trying to wrestle with the struggle that he had. The music. The musical opposition in Tannhäuser is between the strong diatonic scale and that pilgrim chorus that sort of represents Christianity, the kind of ordered universe of Christianity, which also demands a certain type of renunciation of desire, a certain type of asceticism. You have to subordinate your desires to reason or to the truth.
Instead of going with animal instinct, you try to,
Right.
build something more realistic, essentially.
Well, it's a question, you subordinate your desires to the truth, because if you don't, you're going to get in trouble. Everybody knows this. If you eat too much, you get fat. And if you get fat, you get sick. And everybody knows it's an appetite, and you have to control the appetite. Just part of life. It's just that when you get to the sexual appetite, it has all this mystical connotation surrounding it. And you somehow think that you can indulge in this without any of the obvious side effects of indulging in other appetites. And this is what he was struggling with Tannhäuser. And so in the later version, we have two different kinds of music. You have the music of the Pilgrim Chorus with the pilgrims going to Rome, which is strong, straightforward, it's rational, but it indicates that you have to subordinate your desires to a bigger plan, which is also the diatonic scale, by the way, which is basically, you have the notes on the scale, there are a certain number of notes, you come back to where you started, and you have the sense of resolution, catharsis, and rationality because you followed that. But there's always this kind of the other part of Tannhäuser is the Venusberg, which is this place where you get to fulfill all of your sexual desires. There's no light there. It's darkness. It's inside a cave, inside a mountain. It's like the classic example of now, okay, I'm going to subordinate my desires, reason to my desires instead of my desires to reason.
Well, and it's like I was just going to add, it's like Hassani Sabah, for instance, and he, of course, the occult and the intelligence community all worship him. And what is he famous for? But getting the assassins, through hashish and whatever drugs he was using, to go out and commit murder, whatever, assassinations for him. But he would pull them in with this drug, music, sex thing, and that they were in heaven, and that, is this perpetual drug lust, constant feeding all of these appetites. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Now, there were people who had already talked this way before Wagner. The main guy in this regard was the Marquis de Sade, who was involved, actually the man who started the French Revolution, because he was captive, he was held in the Bastille. He sort of urged the mob on from the Bastille, and they stormed the Bastille, and that's the beginning of the French Revolution. And there was a time when the revolution just descended into complete excess, complete murderous excess, where the Place de la République was covered with blood. Mary Wollstonecraft slipped on the blood. There was so much of it when she was there during the time of the guillotinings. And a reaction came about. It was the Catholics from the Vendée who were going to overthrow the revolution. And at this point, the Marquis de Sade formulated what became the principle of basically sexual liberation and political control. He said basically the revolution is based on passion. If you want to keep the revolution, you have to stimulate passions. And if you want to do that, I suggest that you exhibit girls naked in the theater. This will arouse everyone's passions, and therefore then they will become part of the revolution again, and then they will defeat the Vendée. It didn't quite work out that way. It turns out that Napoleon had to defeat the Vendée with cannons. The Vendée were peasants who charged up a hill into cannons. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. They were devout Catholics, but they were stupid when it came to military tactics. Anyway, the Marquis de Sade articulated the principle, and then the principle started to percolate through the European mind, largely through the writings of Abbe Barruel, who started writing about the Illuminati. The Illuminati were a conspiracy that were basically based in Bavaria. A man by the name of Adam Weishaupt was the leader. He was a professor, canon lawyer at the University of Ingolstadt, and he became the basis for Frankenstein, the book by Shelley. Shelley was a revolutionary. He got the idea of revolution from his father-in-law, William Godwin. He wanted to put it in practice. And at this point, your dreams and your passions bump into reality. Okay, sometimes you actually do pull off a revolution. And that was precisely the situation that Wagner found himself in 1848. There was a revolution. There was a potato famine. There was just total disgust at the wretched excess of capitalism. And lots of people just spontaneously rose up in the streets, and there was a revolution suddenly. And Wagner was in the midst of it. He was up in the bell tower in Dresden trying to direct fire. Suddenly, the Prussian army starts firing on him. He realizes it's going to fail. We had our chance. It's not going to work. I'm out of here. And so he leaves town with Bakunin and ends up in Switzerland in exile. And he sits there and he tries to figure out what went wrong. What happened here? Why did the revolution fail? And since it failed, what are the alternatives? And so we came up with basically two alternatives. The public alternative, which I think was the ring cycle. And I talked about this before, but I mean, the Das Rheingold is basically the best kind of mythic explanation of capitalism ever, that an artist ever created. It was basically the Rhine is Germany. At the bottom of the Rhine, there's this gold, which is the possession of the German nation. Alberich shows up. Everybody knew that Alberich was a Jew. Okay, he steals the gold. He's the symbol of the Rothschild family that basically took the Prince of Hesse-Kassel was escaping from Napoleon, had to get his gold out of town. He gave it to Meyer Amschel Rothschild, who sent it off to his son Nathan, and Nathan bet the farm on, he used the gold, he bet the farm that Napoleon would be defeated. He shorted the British consul, and he won. And he made a fortune, and they were able to restore the gold to the Prince of Hesse-Kassel, and he had a fortune himself. That's what we're talking about. That's what Wagner's talking about. And over this period of time, from the French Revolution up to the Revolution of 1848, these people took over Europe, and they created an absolutely intolerable system known as capitalism. Basically, as Wagner put it, you take the gold and then you make a ring, and then the ring becomes the ring of power, and that's how you rule everybody. It's through the gold standard and usury, and you use the gold as a weapon against the majority. So Wagner comes to this conclusion, but, well, wait a minute, what are we going to do about it now? Well, there wasn't enough. There were other revolutions. There was a revolution in Paris in 1870, and during this period of time, I think he just gave up on the idea of revolution. And at this point, I think he started to turn inward, and at this point, he started to understand, well, maybe we can have a sexual revolution. Even if we can't get topple the thrones and the altars, which is what the Illuminati wanted to do. Maybe we can have a sexual revolution. Maybe we can have a good time, even if we can't change the system. Now, this became very important because this is basically the system under which we exist today. It wasn't Wagner who put it in place. It was Michel Foucault who put it in place, the French philosopher. He called it his Faustian pact, or his pact with the devil. And basically what happened in 1975 was when he was teaching at Berkeley, he came up with the pact, and it's basically, if you give us, he's referring to the homosexuals, give us sexual liberation and we won't criticize your economic system. And suddenly you have this marriage made in heaven. You got the left basically collaborating with the capitalists. We're not going to complain about your about your economic exploitation, because now we can screw ourselves to death, which is what Michel Foucault did in the bathhouses of San Francisco, 1984. He died of AIDS. And so we now have this Hegelian kind of synthesis manifested by a guy like Lloyd Blankfein. Lloyd Blankfein, head of Goldman Sachs, is an avid devotee and supporter of homosexual rights and homosexual marriage. Why? Because homosexuality and sexual liberation are the best form of political control ever devised by man.
Well, that's interesting that you should raise that, because I was looking at the symbol of the fasces, the fasci, and what is the fasci? It's a bundle of sticks or twigs, which is bound together with an axe in the top of it, and this is the symbol of so-called fascism. But if you look at it, it's, what is a bundle of sticks or twigs? It's called a faggot. So you take that and you weaponize it. It's a weaponized faggot.
Yeah, it's an equivocal term. Faggot does mean that. It also is a pejorative term referring to homosexuals. The fascism was a reaction against capitalism. Fascism arose during it arose during the 1920s in Italy with Mussolini. It came into its own after the collapse of the stock market in 1929, when international Jewish capitalism was discredited. Anglo-Jewish capitalism was discredited, and people looked around for an alternative. And the fact the what you have here are people united. That's this bundle of sticks kind of tied together, much stronger than any one stick by itself. So what you had was a kind of corporatism in opposition that arose in opposition to the English Jewish individualism that basically allowed the rich people to rule without any limitations. That's, in a sense, the essence of what laissez-faire economics and capitalism is all about. This was a reaction to that, and of course, we know the rest of the story. It happened.
Well,
It happened across the world. It happened in Argentina as well as Germany, Spain, France, Italy, and Portugal. In the Catholic countries, there was a pagan variant. That was the one we got in Germany. National Socialism was pagan. And Wagner played a crucial role in that development because Germany had a problem that Spain and Italy did not have. The problem was known as the Reformation. The Reformation basically divided Germany, and Hitler understood the division. He was working for unity. That's the essence of what fascism is. It's national unity. It's all those sticks tied together. And he couldn't get around the Reformation. He just could not solve the problem of the Reformation. And so he decided, well, I'll make an end run around the Reformation. I'll go back to pre-Christian Europe. I'll go back to the Nibelungenlied. I'll go back to the Völkerwanderung, all those tribes that were wandering around, all my barbaric German ancestors who were wandering around burning and pillaging. We'll go back to that time, and we'll create this mythic German culture and mythic unity based on pre-Christian race memory, something like that. Well, there are still people around today who still believe that mumbo jumbo. It failed. Even Hitler realized that it failed, and very few people realize this. I covered this. It's a book I've written. It's an ebook. You can download it. It's called Ethnos Needs Logos. And it's basically about that period of time that we're just talking about. It's about Christianity coming to Germany. And it's also about me being in Guadalajara talking to David Duke, basically trying to convert David Duke to Catholicism. That was probably a fool's errand, but anyway, I gave it my best shot. And part of this story is me quoting people. This has never been translated into English. It's Wilhelm Schmidt talking about the use of the word Rasse. Rasse is not a German word. They didn't know how to pronounce it. They got it from the Americans. Hitler got the whole idea of race from Madison Grant. Madison Grant used to wave a letter around from Hitler. Hitler was thanking him for giving me it was all American racial mumbo jumbo based on Darwin, based on a whole bunch of stuff. It was basically American racism.
A lot of it, Julian Huxley's as well, but they had created a whole eugenics society that they were promoting all of this through.
It's part of the story. Houston Stewart Chamberlain was kind of like a mixture of Germanic and English racism, but it's all this biological mumbo jumbo, and it's not traditional German stuff. Rasse is not a German word. Volk, das Volk, that's the German word. It means ethnos, the Greek word for ethnic group, and so on and so forth. So basically, this is where it all went in terms of mythology, politics, and the whole ball of wax. Wagner had a huge corrupting effect on the sexual morals of the German elites during the latter part of the 19th century. Thomas Mann testifies to that. Thomas Mann was in many ways a victim of it. Death in Venice is Thomas Mann's version of the Venusberg. Gustav Aschenbach goes to Venice and falls in love with a Polish teenager. Okay, and then he's faced with the question, is sex worth dying for? This is exactly what Michel Foucault said. Is sex worth dying for? And Foucault said yes, and he actually up and died for it. And we are living, the legacy is still with us today. So you take all of these things together, and then you realize that someone is going to start thinking about how to harness all of this sexual power, all of this. And the guy who did it the most, I think, who was most influential in harnessing it, was Wilhelm Reich. And now when you get to someone like Wilhelm Reich, 1933, he's watching Hitler rise to power in Germany. He's a Jew. He was involved with Freud and communism in Vienna in their battle against the Catholic Church in Austria before the war, and then after the war, the mid-war period. And now he's starting to see, how can we weaponize this? How can we weaponize this? He's basically taking the Marquis de Sade to a higher level with all of the experience of Wagner and that mobilization of sexual liberation that took place during the 19th century. At this point, we're entering the realm of social engineering. And that's precisely what happened after World War II. All of these things started to get put into practice. The big breakthrough for Reich came over to the United States. Nobody said this. I think I'm the only guy who said this, but it's pretty clear to me that Reich contracted syphilis. He would go to whorehouses as a soldier during World War I. I think your chances of contracting syphilis are pretty high if you do that kind of sexual behavior. Weimar Republic was haunted by the specter of syphilis. Hitler wrote about it in Mein Kampf. He talked about vampires and German blood. Hitler may have had syphilis himself. We don't know. I asked David Irving that, and he just kind of looked at me with contempt when I asked him the question. But I think Reich had syphilis. I think it went to his head, as it oftentimes does, and he was involved with these grandiose projects at the end of his life, contaminating whole areas of Maine, Rangeley, Maine, with radioactive material that he was trying to focus in his orgone box or something like that. And then they arrested him, and he died in prison in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. But in 1970, the old Reich came back when the New York Times put him on the cover of the New York Times Magazine as basically the father of the 60s sexual revolution. There are plenty of Reichians out there, but I think the real Reichians were the people who were the sexual controllers. And as I said, the culmination of that came about 5 years later after Reich appears. We had the revolution in France, 68. That failed. They're waiting for the revolution again. We have the whole Europe slipping into revolution, the time of the Baader-Meinhof gang when I was in Germany. I wrote a novel about me being in the Baader-Meinhof gang in 1975. It's called The Ratcatcher. You can read it on Kindle Books. And basically, I think, again, as I said, we had a guy who reached the same conclusion. We're not going to have a revolution. The revolution is over. Foucault went to Iran. He went to Tehran in 79. He thought that was the revolution. Well, it was a revolution, but it wasn't the one he wanted. It was a kind of puritanical reaction to the Americanization of Iran under the Shah. And so, he ended up being disappointed and then just went back to the bathhouses and screwed himself to death. And that became the paradigm for all of the rest of us. I don't care where you are or what you do. You're expected to act like a homosexual now.
Yeah.
Which means you're supposed to be involved in transient, sterile relationships because you're easy to exploit economically in this regard.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I've actually covered this a lot on the show.
Yeah, and I think that's the situation where we exist today, and that's sort of the way I see Wagner playing into the whole thing. There was a crucial transition point. I cover this in the book. One of Wagner's followers was Nietzsche. Probably the most influential follower of Richard Wagner was Nietzsche, who wrote books based on his understanding of Wagner. And I accept the story. I think he deliberately infected himself with syphilis as a kind of demonic consecration to sexual liberation.
Yeah, because they're trying to go after the dirtiest, evil, most evil thing they can do or whatever. So in Nietzsche's mind, that was apparently intentionally contracting syphilis. But then you also state in your book that possibly he was faking his madness.
I don't. If I stated that, I'm going to retract it right now. I don't think he was faking madness. Okay, yeah. I think he. Everybody knows he went crazy. The only question is, well, why did you go crazy? And tertiary syphilis, I think, is the best example. It was rampant in Europe at that time. Syphilis didn't always go to the brain, but when it did go to the brain, there were certain symptoms, and one of them was delusions of grandeur. And that's precisely what you see in Nietzsche's last books. I mean, only I could write a title like "Why I Write Such Great Books," but that's one of the titles that Nietzsche came up with. And the other follower of Wagner was Schoenberg, Arnold Schoenberg, a Jew who had converted to Christianity, to Lutheran Christianity, and was living the bohemian life in Austria at the time. As I said in the book, his wife took sexual liberation much more seriously than he did. She had an affair with an artist there. The artist committed suicide. Schoenberg discovered the affair, and he was just mortally wounded by it. And he was so wounded, he just decided he was going to take revenge on everyone, but Christianity in particular. So he renounced Christianity, and then Europe he's going to take revenge on, and specifically he's going to take revenge on music. Because in many ways, I think rightly so, he blames Wagner for his wife's adultery. And I think he probably was right in that regard, because, of course, he was an unwitting agent of his own wife's corruption, because he wrote Verklärte Nacht. And Verklärte Nacht is basically a smeary, as his brother-in-law said, Zemlinsky, it's a smeary version of Tristan and Isolde. So this was state-of-the-art sexual liberation music as of this point in time. But unfortunately, Wagner died, and Schoenberg took it over, and Schoenberg could not really carry it any farther. He had that wound. He turned to atonal music, and as I say in the book, George Antile said, if we had to listen to one more piece by Schoenberg, we all would have committed suicide. And he said, it was therefore with great rejoicing that we welcomed the first Negro jazz band into Paris in 1919. And at this point, the whole idea of sexual liberation jumps from one genre, from classical music to jazz, to American pop music. And that's
how long did this take place over? How long was the transition that they basically got rid of?
Like that.
They got rid of classical, and then jazz, and then rock and everything follow, and then you pretty much by the 70s, classical's entirely wiped out and gone.
I would. What was the last great classical piece of music? I think the last great classical composer was Shostakovich. And he had succumbed to temptations along the way, to the temptation of 12-tone, 8-tonal music as well. But I think he was, and so when was the last great piece of classical music? Was it Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony? So we're talking about the 1940s. After that, what you had was American hegemony. American cultural hegemony. America won the war against Germany. America now takes over the world. We just, one of these London papers just did an article on how the CIA got involved in promoting abstract expressionism.
Oh, sure. Well, and then who is Frances Donner Saunders in his book her book Cultural Cold War exposes all of the art and stuff. And speaking of that, I wanted to talk about this Wagner quote: "Revolutionary art was to become the vehicle for social and cultural revolution."
Absolutely. He was prophetic. He was an early stage of it, but that's precisely, I'm just, as we speak, I just finished an article which will appear in the next issue of Culture Wars about the Cincinnati Ballet and what happened at the Cincinnati Ballet and basically what happened to Cincinnati. How did this Catholic town end up being Sin City? How did that happen? In the beginning, in the 1950s, you had Newport, Kentucky, and Newport, Kentucky was Sin City because you had casinos there run by people like Mo Dalitz and Meyer Lansky, Jewish mobsters. Okay, Sin City got cleaned up in 1960, and now Cincinnati is Sin City. How did that happen? The answer, the one-word answer, is art. It's art. And I'm talking in particular about the Mapplethorpe exhibit, which was put on there in 1990 and then shut down by the police, and there was an obscenity trial. And the people were acquitted, and they talked to the jurors, and they said, obviously, this picture of a guy with a bullwhip up his ass or fisting, this is all obscene. It's obviously obscene, but these professors keep telling me that it's art.
Right. Well, it's like you see this Chinese or Asian woman menstruating on a piece of paper in front of a group of people and calling it art. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous.
That's called performance art. And basically what you're seeing here is exactly what Wagner predicted. I'm sure he could not have imagined in his wildest dreams that it would what performance art would end up being, but that's because he couldn't imagine Jews taking over the art world. And that's precisely what happened when New York became the center of the world or the center of the universe. And that happened.
Economically speaking, or?
Well, I'm talking about economically, culturally, every other way. And they are the people that created Robert Mapplethorpe. Robert Mapplethorpe was a good, Catholic altar boy who wanted to make it in the art world. And he realized to make it in the art world, in a Jewish art world, you got to do blasphemy and pornography. That's what they're interested in. That's what George Soros loves. That's what he promotes in Eastern Europe. That's what the Jews do. That's how they took over the art world. And that's why Cincinnati is Sin City. It was art that did it. And Wagner was the guy who prophesied that. And now we live in a world of total, total cultural depravity. And I'm saying, I know my children, my son and daughter-in-law are ballet. They perform in the ballet. They're tired of it. This is not the lives. I said before, you have to act like a homosexual, even if you're not a homosexual. And this is a fortiori true of the art world, where you really have to act like a homosexual. And that means, okay, transient, sterile relationships with somebody until your contract doesn't get renewed, and that's the end of your relationship. I mean, no wonder they're doing these unhappy dances. Sure. And then they take you like a Dixie cup after taking the best years of your lives, and dancers begin like when they're 5 years old, maybe 3 years old, and taking you and crumpling you up and throwing you in the trash can, and that's the end of your career. And oh, by the way, if you happen to be a woman and you're 35, you may not be able to have children now. But hey, it's art, right? So you sacrificed yourself on the altar of art. Too bad. Which is what happened to Mapplethorpe. I again, as I said, Wagner is the guy who understood the power that art could have, and probably is the father. What he said about revolution is true.
Let's talk about melody versus discord.
Yes, we're getting into the metaphysics of music here, which the best introduction to this is Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. The Jew doesn't have any melody. Why is that? Jews make music. Jews can make music. Look at George Gershwin, Meyerbeer. Wagner didn't like Meyerbeer, but hey, it's music, right? What is Shakespeare trying to tell us here? It's logos. The Jews, Shakespeare was a traditional man living in a revolutionary era. He was a Catholic who was living in a time when it was a criminal offense to be a Catholic, and Jesuit priests would be drawn and quartered for public entertainment if they got caught saying the Mass. He understood the traditional meaning of Western culture, and basically that Christianity was the manifestation of Logos, that Jesus Christ was the Logos incarnate, and that the Jews were in rebellion against Logos. They killed the Logos incarnate. They killed Christ. And when they did that, they became enemies of the entire human race. It wasn't Hitler who said that. It was St. Paul, 1 Thessalonians 2, who said that. Shakespeare understood it, and Shylock is the character who manifests this rebellion against Logos by engaging in unnatural activity. What's his unnatural activity? It's usury. He's making sterile coins copulate. Barren metal is what Shakespeare referred to it. Barren metal, the usurer and the sodomite are in the same circle in hell, because the usurer takes what is sterile, namely money, and makes it fertile, and the sodomite takes what is fertile, namely sex, and makes it sterile through sodomy. So Shakespeare, so the manifestation of this in Merchant of Venice is music, what the ancients called the music of the spheres. Jessica is a Jew. She's Shylock's daughter, but she falls in love with a Christian. The Christian converts her to his religion, and as part of her catechesis, he has to take her outside and show her the stars at night and talk about the music of the spheres. In other words, harmony is a manifestation of Logos and a manifestation of God's plan for the universe. Has to have a good ending because God is its author. Now, of course, we all know that that's easy to say, but we're all afflicted with evil during life, and the evil is symbolized by discord in music. And in a sense, you can't have music without discord, can you? Because you can't have, you need a conflict, because the only way you can understand the reality of the good is by some type of experience of evil. It's just like the only way you can know that it's dark is because you understood what light is. And that's precisely the drama that we see with Shakespeare. And it's also, as I said before, the drama that you experience every time you listen to a really good piece of music. We state the theme, here's the issue, suddenly a conflict arises, and because of some type of power, because of the power of Logos, that conflict has a happy resolution. That's what music's about. We feel good because we experience that resolution. We feel better persons. Aristotle called it catharsis, and he felt that catharsis, watching plays like that or music, had a kind of medicinal effect. And I think it's true. I think he was right. The opposite, I deal with the opposite in Dionysos Rising when I deal with atonal and 12-tone music. There's a German book, it hasn't been translated into English, it's called Musik in der Zwangsjacke, or Music in the Straitjacket. And in that book, the author basically talks about how all of these orchestras that are forced to play 12-tone music have a higher incidence of illness than orchestras that do not play 12-tone music. In other words, this music, the discord here, this constant, unrelieved, unresolved discourse makes you sick. And it's also a manifestation of the Jewish revolutionary spirit. The classic example of this is Schoenberg's opera, Moses and Aaron. A completely insufferable piece of musical torture that got performed for the first time after the war, 1954 in Berlin. And there were actually people there who, people couldn't stand it. Nobody can stand listening to this piece of music. It drives you crazy. And the people who objected to it were denounced as anti-Semites. And that has been basically
that's always the standard cloak, though. You know.
Yeah, it's the last that's the last refuge of a scoundrel now. So this is precisely, but what it symbolized, of course, was the Jewish takeover of German culture, because everything that was called the Entartete Kunst under Hitler was now de rigueur. It was mandatory, and you had to like it, and if you didn't like it, basically you were an anti-Semite. And so what happened here is that the American intelligence community imposed a musical form of social engineering on the German people.
Yes, I would totally agree with that. All right, so let's go into this. What is this 12-tone music? Who started it? Was Schoenberg and one other guy that he ripped it off from. I forget, H something.
Yeah, the man who really discovered it was a man by the name of Joseph Matthias
Or Matthias, okay.
Hauer.
Hauer.
And he was a very eccentric, kind of crazy kind of guy who was incredibly sensitive to the music of the times. And there's a book, I forget the name of the novel that was written based on Hauer, but basically the character goes to a Wagnerian concert, and it's like walking in and watching pornography. This is the feeling he has because he's very musically sensitive. It's just a way over the top, too emotional type of stuff. Schoenberg did this kind of stuff too. Pelleas and Melisande is a way over the top, way too emotional. It just drives you crazy. You're just exhausted after 5 minutes. And this is precisely the reaction that Hauer had, Joseph Matthias Hauer had. And he created a system that was going to basically put, as the Germans would, put Musik in the Zwangsjacke, put music in the straitjacket. We're going to discipline music. In other words, we're not going to have any harmony anymore because harmony is like sex. It's like two notes becoming one. So there'll be no harmony because he's tired of all this sexual exhibitionism in Wagner. And so you just have 12 tones. You play those 12 notes, and then you play them over again, and you rearrange them, and it becomes a kind of parlor game, which is interesting, but it's not music, And this is the vehicle that Schoenberg appropriated. The discussion is called der Wiener Prioritätsstreit, which is basically who discovered it, Schoenberg or Hauer. I think Hauer discovered it. I think Schoenberg stole it from him. Whatever it is, it became the norm after World War II. And it became the norm because the United States adopted it as their form of punishing Germany. It was social engineering, clearly social engineering. There's no question about it. Everybody knows now. It was people like Adorno, who was a Jew, who wanted to punish the Germans for what they had done. And so they created the summer programs at Donau-Eschingen, and they created a music radio station, Südwest Rundfunk, and this began to promote 12-tone music. It produced geniuses like John Cage, if you want to call him a genius. And basically, a monkey could do 12-tone music, and so it became popular because anybody can do it. It doesn't take any musical talent whatsoever to do it. And it just became the norm. And otherwise sensible people like Stravinsky, for some reason, got involved in this form of social engineering. I don't know why he would do this, but he did. Because it was the dance craze that everybody was doing. It was like bigger than the twist in 1954 or whatever it was. And basically, it took over the whole musical world, and it was like a fever, and basically had to shake that fever off. But it became part of social engineering. And I was in a band in Germany. I was in a rock band in Germany. And there was one guy who had talent, and I wasn't the guy. And he went on to study music at the Robert Schumann Institute, and he wrote some god-awful modern pieces. And I told him, I said, look, Heiner, this is social engineering. It's not music. And of course, he was a good German. He was a good German at the time. He thought he was being, this is what they were teaching, and this is what he was going to do. It was like the typical German acceptance of social engineering. Until finally he realized what I said was true, and then he had to discover Bach all on his own. You couldn't learn about Bach if you went to the Robert Schumann Institute. All you could learn about was 12-tone. This is proof, in my opinion, that it was engaging in social engineering and not musical education.
And then the irony, I just want to pull you back a second, and the irony was that Adorno was like a propagandist or something for the Nazis, wasn't he?
Don't know about that. Don't remember that. I was thinking.
You had talked about him, yeah. But you had talked about several quotes of his in your book where he was heavily promoting the Nazis and saying that Hitler was great.
I said it in the book, it must be true. But I mean, we're talking about something I wrote 25 years ago, so maybe if I say it's in there, it's true. Okay, these people were all, in a sense, opportunists who would, go with the wind. They would go with the prevailing power. And the prevailing power after the war was the United States of America. And so they paid the piper and they called the tune, literally called the tune here. And the tune was 12-tone music. And that's where, I was in Weimar, the center of German culture. Just happened, I'm on my way back from the Czech Republic. I have to go back to where I was in the Lower Rhine. Stop into Weimar on the way. We could do a tour of the town, and there's this big hole in the ground. Everything else looks great. Weimar, Kulturstadt, Internationale Kulturstadt, United Nations Cultural City. And there's still a hole in the ground. What's the hole in the ground? Well, it happens to be Bach's house. Now, first of all, why was Bach's house destroyed? Why did the Allies bomb this house and leave the rest of Weimar standing? Because Bach was the soul of German music. And if you want to destroy the German soul, destroy Bach, destroy his house, and then destroy his memory, so that your friend, my friend Heiner, had to find out who Bach was on his own. And then he started doing, he directed choirs. He went on to do all kinds of stuff, composing, directing choirs. I took his choir on a tour of the United States in the 1990s. We traveled all around. And basically, but he had to discover it on his own because Bach was prohibited, because he was too German. This is the type of wretched cultural imperialism that the United States uses to create enemies throughout the world, and then always doing it covertly and secretly as a way of destroying everyone else's culture. And producing nothing of its own worthwhile to replace it. As I think it's George Bernard Shaw said, America went from barbarism to decadence without finding civilization along the way.
Yeah, and I find it amusing these days. You flip through the radio, especially on satellite radio, and there used to be a 40s station. I think they've recently gotten rid of it, but you could go by decade and you could see the hard shift in the music at each decade point. And then now the musicians, if you can call them that, don't require any talent at all. They make a bunch of squeaks and noises that are then mixed in the studio and put together as some sort of music. I mean, it's completely talentless at this point.
Yeah, it's so far. Actually, I have to listen to this. I have to suffer through this whenever I lift weights. And I have to. I can't tell you how insipid this hip hop stuff is. It's real. It's so formulaic. They must have computers just producing the stuff. It's like what happened to techno in Germany. It was just computers talking to other computers. But the other stuff, there was a time when I was listening to this. I don't know what. I don't even know what to call it. Was like Marilyn Manson. What is this type of music called? It makes you want to pick up a gun.
Well, he's Satanist. What is he? Goth? I don't know.
I don't know what it is.
We exposed him in my series with Hans.
Yeah. So it's this type of devil worship music that, as I said, makes you want to pick up a gun and shoot somebody. Transgender,
trans this, trans that. It's all of that stuff,
Anyway, so it makes you look back. So everybody heaves a sigh of relief whenever they put the oldie station on, because it's recognizable as music. So it looks like the golden age, but that's what's happened. It's just it's like. Again, to give you another cultural correlative, they had the art show in Leaper Park, which is a block away from my house. Every year they have it during the summer in June, and you go over there, and I hope nobody's offended by this, but everybody looks ugly, and the art looks ugly too. Everything looks ugly. If you're dyeing your hair that color, shoe polish red, it doesn't make you look good. I don't know who told you that that made you look good, but they
I
want.
always thought that that was for clowns, but and you went
And,
to the circus to see that.
and shoe polish red is kind of conservative compared to green and purple. Who told you that dyeing your hair purple made you look good, honey? It doesn't.
Right.
I'm sorry, it doesn't. And if you think that if you think it does, what you're telling me is that you've lost all contact with any sense of beauty. That's what's happened. We haven't, as Wallace Stevens once said, the world is ugly and the people are sad. And it's all because of the corruption of art, putting art in the service of all of this social engineering stuff that we've been subjected to for the past half century and more.
Very interesting. We've already talked about this relation into pornography. Is there more that you want to add on to that, between the music and the pornography?
The music. I got in trouble for writing an article saying that Jews control pornography. Okay, pornography is something Jews promote. They make money off it, and they also corrupt the morals of people and weaken the majority generation. So I got in trouble for saying that, and then this Jewish professor in England took all of my research, put it in his article, and then just bragged about it, and then he published it in the Jewish Quarterly in England. So there's this colossal double standard here, and no one's allowed to talk about no one's allowed to talk about the bad influence that Jews have had on our culture, specifically the art world. I mean, you name it, they've had a bad influence. The people of the United States recognized this early on in the 1920s when Hollywood started subverting the morals of the nation by pushing nudity and blasphemy and all the type of stuff that Jews like in their films. It led to the Protestants tried to do it with the Hays Code, and then the Catholics stepped up to the plate, and they finally defeated the Jews with the institution of the Production Code in 1933. This is classic Kulturkampf, classic culture wars, classic American culture wars, because it's always a battle between Protestants, Catholics, and Jews about who's going to control the culture. And what we've seen here is basically the complete rout of Catholicism as having an influence on American culture. Began in 1965. That's when the Jews broke the Production Code with their Holocaust film called The Pawnbroker, which was basically an excuse to smuggle tits onto the big screen. It's the Holocaust with tits. That's what the Pawnbroker is. That's how they broke the code. And from then on, there's a direct line not only to the pornography that is rampant in our culture today, but also, I would say, the neocon takeover of America's foreign policy. No one opposed these people anymore. Whatever they said was it. It was they got to determine the fashion, and they've refashioned. They've created basically a Jewish culture, and anyone who doesn't go along with it is now guilty of anti-Semitism, hate crimes, and should be investigated by the FBI.
All right, we have a few minutes left here. So, where does the myth of Dionysus originate?
Dionysus was the Asiatic god of sexual intoxication and sexual excess. So it came from Asia. It had a threatening effect on Greek culture, and the man who displayed or gave the classic representation of this threat was Euripides, and the play was the Bacchae, which was basically about what happens when the women leave their looms and go and worship Dionysus by dancing naked on the mountainside. It's the end of civilization, unleashing the sexual power from the home or from marriage has a destructive effect on society. That was the lesson that Euripides tried to tell everyone. Nietzsche, of course, turned it upside down and portrayed it as liberation, when basically it was nothing more than mayhem. That's where it came from. The end of it is, it's Agave, one of the Bacchant women. Pentheus is the king. He's going to capture Dionysus, captures him. Dionysus says, "Do you want to see the women dance naked on the hillside?" Pentheus says, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do." And he has to put on a dress. He loses his authority. The women see him. They tear him limb from limb. It's over. You can't have a culture based on this type of thing. And so the end of it is Agave, his mother, who participated in his dismemberment. She's sitting on stage. His head is in her lap. Her father comes in and says, "What do you see?" And she says, "It's a trophy." And then she says, the intoxication wears off, and she realizes she killed her own son. And then she said, "I see horror. I see suffering. I see grief." And that's why sexual liberation led to horror movies, which is a whole other story. I wrote a book about that called Monsters from the Id, but that's where that fits in. That's the situation we're in now. We were in the 70s when people putting it into practice realized it's destroying me. They woke up, and then they had this cathartic moment of watching horror movies.
And how is intoxication a Dionysian emotion?
Well, because you need to break down your inhibitions, and wine is good at doing that. I mean, we have, women don't want to take their clothes off in public. They feel uncomfortable when they do that, right? Yeah. So you have to get them drunk. When they're drunk, they're more likely to do it. So that's why it's part of the whole package.
How were blacks used to promote sexual liberation?
The Jews created something called the Harlem Renaissance, which was basically using the Negro and jazz in particular as a paradigm of sexual liberation. I gave a talk at Harvard on this that nearly got me lynched in 1992. I guess I was a little provocative in the poster that I made up. I made up a poster. It was called "Spade Kicks: the Negro as a Paradigm of Sexual Liberation." Put it all over the Harvard campus. Everyone was outraged. The Black Students Association showed up en masse, and then half of them walked out. But it's all there. I mean, they're just flogging the sea with chains here. You'd think at a place like Harvard, you'd be able to talk about something like the Harlem Renaissance. But political correctness had taken over the place at that point, and they've never recovered.
And why don't we finish with Rolling Stones? What can you say? We did a 2-part series. Your book ends with the Stones. Let's bring it back or bring it up to the Stones.
White guys acting like Negroes. The White Negro was an essay that Norman Mailer wrote. He was talking about jazz, but rock and roll was the same thing. All these English guys started playing the blues. And the movie is the definitive Dionysian festival for our age was that Altamont rock concert, which given by the Rolling Stones as their antidote to Woodstock. And basically what happened is it got out of control. You drove, you have music that basically arouses everyone's passions, and that's exactly what they did, and they nearly got killed. One guy did get killed. A black guy got murdered by a Hell's Angel in front of the stage. But you can watch Maisley's documentary film. It's called "Gimme Shelter," and there's a scene there. It's worth the whole price of admission where Keith Richards is scared to death, and he actually makes the sign of the cross. Check it out. Keith Richards making the sign of the cross because he thinks he's going to die, because he thinks that Hell's Angels and the whole mob is going to sweep over the stage and tear him limb from limb, just like the Bacchae did to Pentheus.
And then you have George Lucas filming the whole thing. You have Timothy Leary.
The Maisley brothers did it. The documentary I'm talking about was done by the Maisley.
Well, I know. What I'm saying, though, is George Lucas was there filming the murder and the whole concert. And then he takes off in THX and Star Wars shortly after that. You had Timothy Leary there. Vito Palakis was there on one of the the scaffolding stands that they had, and Vito Palakis is the one who created the whole hippie dance and all of this stuff. But they definitely put on a show. So anyway, Michael, thank you so very much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I think we had discussed having you back again sometime in the near future for a book you're just finishing up. Would love to do that for you if you're interested.
Yeah, I suggested Slaughter of Cities because it's about social engineering in the real hardcore social engineering. But, it'd be my pleasure to come back. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Yeah, and Michael, what's your website again?
Culturewars.com. You can reach me at jones@culturewars.com.
And thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you heard today, please support the show. We appreciate all your support. We can't do it without you. Gnosticmedia.com. And we'll see you next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Thanks again, Michael.
Thank you.